Okay, I want to talk about briefly about Heidegger's phenomenological method vis-a-vis history. Around the 1930s, he started to change the way he did phenomenology from what we would call a early 20th century Husserlian model, which is very methodical and is very focused on method, to a more historical approach. Because Heidegger's interested in a phenomenology of being, right? He read Husserl's Logical Investigations, and in the sixth investigation, he talks about categorical intuition and what it would mean to have a phenomenological intuition or apprehension or insight of being. And Heidegger thinks right after Being in Time, which is around the late 20s, 1927, he starts turning to history, and he looks for epochs in history in order for these epochs in history to disclose a particular understanding of being, a particular understanding of reality. So when Heidegger looks at history phenomenologically, what I called in class, if you remember, Seinsgeschichtliche Denken, the historical thinking of being, Seinsgeschichtliche Denken, Heidegger is looking at the history of Western thought, really from Plato onward until the 20th, 21st century, particularly Plato to Nietzsche he's very interested in. But he's looking for, in the history of thought, the unraveling of a certain conception of reality, the unraveling of a certain conception of being. And this is how he does phenomenology. He's looking at being showing itself, or the thought about being showing itself in different registers, with a continual thread throughout Western culture, beginning from Plato and really following all the way through to Nietzsche. Okay, this is the historical thinking of being. And the reason he does this is because he's looking for, like we said, a diagnosis and a cure. And he sees in the history of Western thinking, in the history of the thinking about reality, or the thinking about the meaning of things, we could just say, because every historical epoch has a certain understanding of what things are, a certain understanding of the meaning of being, beings, of the being of beings. And so when he's asking the question about what the framework is, he's really also asking, where did the framework come from? Where did Gestalt come from? What's the origin of Gestalt? And he thinks the origin of Gestalt lies in a certain conception of reality, a certain conception of being that began with the Greeks and was promulgated by the Christians, and then followed all the way through to Descartes and the moderns and the mathematical and Copernican turn in Kant, and then all the way right up to Nietzsche. And he thinks, so there's a kind of logical thread that connects Western thinking from Plato to Nietzsche. Richard Rorty puts it this way: once you get on the Platonic escalator, you can't help but get off at Nietzsche. And we have to think about why that is. One of the things we said in class, if you recall, think about what the standard of truth that Plato sets up. Heidegger is very much interested in this in an essay around the mid-30s called Plato's Doctrine of Truth. And he says here, he doesn't put it this way, but this is a helpful way to put it. Think about what it means to think about the essence of something. What is the meaning of something? What's the essence of a cup? Or what's the essence of a pen? We talked a little bit about this in class, what the essence of a chair is, or a table. The essence, is really, at the end of the day, what it's useful for. A pen is used to write. A table is used to eat at. A chair is used to sit for. So essence, the Platonic impulse to search for the essence of things, or the whatness of things, or the form of things, the eidos of things, the ideas, the forms, really is, at the end of the day, can only be satisfied by use or utility or function. So he thinks from the get-go, Plato is connected to Nietzsche. So the standard of truth that Plato sets up, what's the essence of something, really can only be fulfilled by utility or by will to power. So there's a direct thread from Plato to Nietzsche. You might say, that's crazy. How Plato splits the world in two. Nietzsche's all about critiquing metaphysics or critiquing Platonism. Metaphysics is Platonism for Nietzsche. Nietzsche says my philosophy is an inverted Platonism. But for Heidegger, he's stepping out and doing a sort of meta picture, and he sees that Nietzsche is really in the same system as Plato. That Nietzsche's attempt to overcome metaphysics is just as metaphysical as the metaphysics it tries to overcome, or just as Platonistic as the Platonism it tries to overcome. And the reason for that simply is thought itself, when it sets up the criterion for whatness or quiddity or essence or truth or form, really can only end in utility. Okay, so the origin of the framework, now coming full circle, the origin of the framework for Heidegger, what is the essence of Gestalt? Well, Gestalt is rooted in the history of thinking. And we said, we can think of it this way. Where did Gestalt come from? Or what's the essence of technology? Well, the essence of technology is Gestalt. Well, what's Gestalt? Gestalt really is, and you think of, or I use this example in class, you think of at the end of Scooby-Doo when they catch the bad guy and they pull off the hat or the mask and it's really somebody else. And so we think of this, we have modern science and technology, we pull off the mask and it's Nietzsche. What's really behind modern scientific and technological thinking is will to power, is controllability, is mastery, right? We said this, I've given examples of this before in class, namely that the criteria for truth that science sets up is manipulability, or controllability. Can I control something? Can I predict and control it? So science is being guided by technology for Heidegger. But the interesting thing is this, that when you pull off the mask of technology, it's really will to power. The underlying metaphysics, or the underlying conception of reality that supports modern science and technology for Heidegger is Nietzschean, is will to power. Right? That's the understanding of things. I don't really know something until I can control it, manipulate it. What's the truth of something? I don't know until I can control it, right? We dig deeper, though. We pull off Nietzsche's hat, and we see it's Plato. Why is it Plato? Well, technology is Nietzschean, and Nietzsche is Plato, because the metaphysics of essence for Heidegger can only be fulfilled by will to power. But moreover, Heidegger thinks, where did the essence of the metaphysics of essence come from? Where did Platonism come from? The idea that we have a split world of forms and essences and ideas, and then the sensible world here of particulars, of universal and particulars. And he thinks, really, Platonism comes out of what Heidegger calls, and he says this in a text called Basic Problems of Phenomenology, right around the late 1920s. He says, the metaphysics of Platonism, or the metaphysics of metaphysics, comes out of a technological comportment of Dasein. And he thinks of it this way, that you don't start to think of the world in terms of form and matter, in terms of universals and particulars, in terms of the split world, unless you're a craftsman. Someone making, I don't know, you think of Geppetto making a shoe, right? And you have the matter there. And what does Geppetto do when he makes the shoe? He looks up to the idea of the form, and instantiates it in the matter. And ipso facto splits the world in two, right? He says, I'm trying to form this matter here. What do I do when I'm trying to form this matter? I look to the ideal, right? This metaphysics of essence, and then I instantiate it in the world. Right there, he thinks that he's thinking of Dasein's comportment, or the human being's attitude toward reality, such that a metaphysics of essence would arise. And so it comes from, therefore, Platonism, that is, the metaphysics of essences, Western metaphysics. You can think of it this way, all of Western thought, thinking itself, comes from a technological comportment. So it's no wonder then that it can only be fulfilled by technology. You see? So Platonism arises from a technological attitude to begin with. Right? And Marx would agree here, because we're the animal laborans, we're the working animal, we're the technological being. So Platonism arises from a technological attitude. Therefore, the fulfillment of its metaphysics, when we start reflecting on itself, what am I doing here? What is this? Can only be fulfilled by the metaphysics of will to power. Okay? So, Gestell, pull off the first mask, Nietzsche. Pull off the mask of Nietzsche, Plato. Now, what happens when we pull off the Platonistic mask? This is when it gets very interesting.